When you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, you may think you're just seeing a reflection. But you're not. You're seeing the most powerful filter through which you interpret the world, your perception of yourself. That image, that silent judgment about who you are and what you're worth, it quietly shapes every action you take and every opportunity you either reach for or retreat from. It's like the lens on a camera. If the lens is scratched, clouded, or distorted, the picture you produce will be flawed no matter how beautiful the scene really is. And in the same way, if the way you see yourself is twisted by doubt, shame, or unworthiness, then your experience of reality will reflect that distortion. Think about it. Two people can walk into the same room, face the same challenges, even carry the same level of skill and potential, yet one thrives while the other falters. Why? Because the first sees themselves as capable, worthy of a seat at the table, someone whose contribution matters. The second has already convinced themselves that they don't belong, that they're an imposter, that failure is inevitable. And the tragic thing is that the world often bends to match that belief. If you see yourself as weak, your actions will quietly reinforce that weakness. If you see yourself as someone unworthy of love or success, you will behave in ways that push those very things further out of reach. This isn't magic, and it isn't some superficial trick. It's a psychological reality. We don't move through life responding to objective truth as much as we'd like to believe. We respond to the story we're telling ourselves about who we are. That story is the filter, and it dictates what we notice, what we ignore, what risks we dare to take, and how resilient we are when things inevitably go wrong. If the story you tell yourself is that you're fragile, then every stumble confirms your fragility. But if the story is that you are resilient, every stumble becomes proof of your strength. And here's the deeper consequence: your self-perception doesn't just stay inside you, it radiates outward. People can sense it in the way you stand, in the tone of your voice, in the confidence, or hesitation behind your words. When you see yourself as valuable, others are far more likely to treat you that way. When you diminish yourself internally, the world often mirrors that diminishment back to you. So the question becomes, what would happen if you deliberately, courageously decided to change the way you see yourself? What if you stopped defining yourself by your worst mistakes or your lowest moments, and instead allowed yourself to be defined by your potential, your capacity to grow, and the strengths you may have been downplaying all along? The shift wouldn't just change your inner world. It would ripple outward into your relationships, your work, and the very trajectory of your life. But understand this. It's not about lying to yourself. It's not about repeating hollow affirmations that you don't believe. It's about an honest, unflinching reevaluation. It's about asking, am I seeing myself clearly, or am I trapped in a distorted narrative that no longer serves me? Clarity, not delusion, is the goal. And clarity often reveals that you are stronger, more capable, and more resilient than you dared to admit. When you begin to shift that inner lens, the world begins to shift with it. You start noticing opportunities where before you only saw obstacles. You find yourself walking a little taller, speaking with a little more certainty, taking steps that once felt impossible. And little by little, the person you saw in your mind becomes the person the world sees standing before them. So if you want to change your life, begin by changing the way you see yourself. Because until you do, every dream, every ambition, every possibility will remain at the mercy of a distorted lens. But when you do, when you finally look in that mirror and see not just who you've been, but who you're capable of becoming, that's when everything else begins to change. Every one of us carries a set of beliefs about who we are and what we're capable of. Some of these beliefs serve us well. They remind us of our competence, our discipline, our resilience. But mixed in with those are the quieter, darker convictions that whisper we're not good enough, not smart enough, not deserving of success or love. These are limiting beliefs, and they operate like invisible chains. You don't always notice them at first, but they restrict your movement, they shrink your world, and they convince you that the cage you're in is reality, when in fact it's just perception. The tragedy is that most of these beliefs weren't even chosen consciously. Many of them were absorbed in childhood. From a careless remark by a parent, a humiliating moment at school, or a failure that got cemented into memory as proof of inadequacy. Over time, those moments harden into convictions, and before you know it, you're carrying them into adulthood like unquestioned truths. You try to take a step forward, but that inner voice interrupts. You're not the kind of person who can do that. You dream about a different life, but immediately sabotage it with the thought, "That's for other people, not for me." Now, here's the uncomfortable reality. You will act as though those beliefs are true, even if they're not. If you believe you're destined to fail, you won't take risks. If you believe you don't deserve love, you'll push away people who try to give it. If you believe you're not intelligent, you'll shy away from learning, and in doing so, you'll prove yourself right. Limiting beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies, and they keep you locked inside a version of yourself that's far smaller than who you could be. But here's the good news. You can challenge them, and the first step is awareness. You've got to notice that voice when it speaks. Write it down, examine it, and ask, where did this come from? Who told me this was true? And what evidence do I actually have that it's real? Most of the time, you'll find that these beliefs aren't based on objective reality. They're based on outdated experiences and unexamined assumptions. They're like old software running in the background, slowing down the entire system. Once you see them clearly, the next step is to test them. Deliberately do something that runs against the grain of that belief. If you think you're terrible at speaking in public, sign up for a small presentation. If you think you can't handle leadership, volunteer to take the lead on a project. If you think you're unworthy of connection, risk opening up to someone you trust. Every time you disprove that old belief, even in a small way, you loosen its grip. And what begins as a whisper of doubt eventually becomes a new narrative. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Maybe I'm capable of more. This isn't about blind optimism. It's about evidence. You build new beliefs the same way the old ones were built, through repeated experiences. The difference is that this time you're choosing them consciously. You're replacing the false stories of limitation with grounded truths of possibility. And slowly, you begin to inhabit a new identity, not by pretending, but by living it into reality. Imagine the freedom that comes when those chains begin to fall away. The projects you never started, the conversations you avoided, the risks you refused to take, suddenly they're back on the table. Life becomes larger, not because the world has changed, but because you've stopped letting a handful of outdated lies dictate the size of your life. The world is difficult enough as it is. Don't make it harder by carrying beliefs that were never true to begin with. Challenge them, confront them, replace them, because if you don't, they will keep you small. But if you do, if you dare to rewrite the story, you'll discover that most of the barriers you thought were unbreakable were never walls at all. They were just shadows. It's astonishing how skilled people become at cataloging their flaws. They can recite them like a litany. Too anxious, too lazy, too weak, too broken, too unworthy. For many, it's almost second nature to focus on what's missing, on the mistakes made, on the weaknesses that still linger. And while it's true that we all have shortcomings that demand attention, there's something profoundly destructive about living as if your flaws are the sum total of who you are. When you do that, you rob yourself of the strength, the courage, and the dignity that are just as much a part of you, if not more. Think for a moment about how you speak to yourself. Most people, if they tracked their internal dialogue, would realize they're harsher to themselves than they would ever dream of being to another person. You wouldn't tell your child or your closest friend that they're worthless, that their effort is meaningless, that their failures define them. Yet how often do you tell yourself exactly that? And here's the crucial point. What you focus on expands. If you give constant attention to your flaws, you magnify them. You make them the center of the story, and the rest of your strengths are pushed to the background, forgotten, or even denied. But strengths matter. They matter profoundly. You are not a blank slate defined by deficiency. You are a complex individual with real talents, virtues, and victories. Maybe you have an uncommon resilience that has carried you through pain that others could not have endured. Maybe you have an instinct for empathy, the ability to truly listen and care for people when they are at their lowest. Maybe you have discipline in one domain, creativity in another, or courage in a place where others hesitate. These things are not trivial. They are not accidents. They are your arsenal against the chaos of life. And yet, because they come naturally to you, you may dismiss them. That's the irony of strengths. They often feel ordinary to the person who has them because they've always been there. But what feels ordinary to you may be extraordinary to someone else. The world doesn't need another version of your flaws amplified. It needs your strengths lived out fully. And when you ignore them, when you bury them under endless criticism of your imperfections, you deny not only yourself, but the people around you, the gifts you are meant to bring. Now, none of this means you pretend your flaws don't exist. Ignoring them is as dangerous as obsessing over them. But there's a difference between honest self-improvement and self-flagellation. Improvement comes from a foundation of strength, of knowing what you do well, what resources you already possess, and what you can lean on as you tackle the areas that need work. If you only stare at the cracks in the foundation, you'll never see that the structure itself is strong enough to hold far more than you imagined. So ask yourself, what do I do well? Where have I been strong in the past? When did I overcome something I thought was impossible? And what does that say about who I actually am? You might be surprised to realize that your life already contains proof of your capability. The trick is to notice it, to honor it, and to build on it. The truth is, we need to stop treating our strengths like footnotes and our flaws like headlines. Strength deserves to take center stage. Strength is what carries you forward when times get hard. Strength is what inspires others when they watch you endure and grow. Strength is the evidence that you are more than your mistakes, more than your shortcomings, more than the harsh judgment you've leveled against yourself for years. So the invitation is simple, though not easy. Celebrate your strengths, not with arrogance, not with denial of your flaws, but with gratitude and responsibility. Because your strengths are not only your own, they are what you contribute to the world. And if you fail to see them, if you refuse to celebrate them, you will live a smaller story than the one you were capable of telling. But when you do see them, when you honor them, and when you step into them fully, you become a force that even your flaws cannot overshadow. Life is full of difficulty, and that is unavoidable. You will face setbacks, disappointments, betrayals, failures, and losses. The question is not whether these things will happen. They will. The question is how you will interpret them. Because the meaning you give to what happens to you can either crush you under its weight or transform you into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. That's the power of reframing. Most people assume reality speaks for itself, but it doesn't. Events are neutral until we assign them meaning. Losing a job, for example, could be seen as a devastating confirmation that you're useless, or it could be seen as the painful push you needed to finally pursue a path that's aligned with your values. Failing an exam could be interpreted as proof that you're stupid, or as evidence that you need to refine your study habits and push yourself harder than you thought possible. The facts are the same. What changes is the frame, and the frame matters more than you realize because it determines how you respond. If you frame a setback as the end of the story, you'll stop moving forward. But if you frame it as a chapter in the middle, you'll keep going, and eventually you'll reach a different ending. Think of the people you admire most. Almost without exception, they are not people who avoided suffering. They are people who encountered it and then reframed it in a way that gave them strength instead of despair. They saw loss and said, "This will not define me." They saw failure and said, "This is where I learn." They saw rejection and said, "This will forge resilience." That act of reframing is what made them admirable in the first place. Now, reframing does not mean lying to yourself or pretending pain isn't real. It's not about putting a fake smile over heartbreak or pretending that betrayal doesn't sting. Pain must be acknowledged honestly. But once you've acknowledged it, you still get to decide what it means. You can decide whether it's the final word or the first step towards something greater. Reframing is not denial. It's responsibility. It's taking ownership of the narrative so that life's hardest moments don't go to waste. Consider how often people sabotage themselves with destructive frames. I failed, so I must be a failure. That's a frame. I was rejected, so I must be unlovable. That's a frame. I struggled, so I must not be cut out for this. Another frame. None of these are objective truths. They're interpretations. And if you can choose an interpretation that disempowers you, you can also choose one that strengthens you. That choice is always available, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. You could look at your scars as reminders of how weak you were when you got hurt, or you could look at them as proof of how strong you had to be to survive. You could see the years you spent lost as wasted time, or you could see them as the raw material for wisdom that others desperately need. You could see the obstacles in your path as evidence that the world is against you, or you could see them as the very training ground that will prepare you for the challenges ahead. Reframing is a discipline. It's not something you do once, it's a habit you cultivate. Each time you encounter difficulty, you pause and ask, what else could this mean? How could this hardship serve me rather than destroy me? What story could I tell about this moment that makes me stronger instead of weaker? And with practice, that way of thinking becomes natural. If you refuse to reframe, life will break you. If you embrace it, life will still hurt you, but it will also build you. And that's the choice we each face. We cannot choose the tragedies that come our way, but we can choose whether those tragedies become the reason we stop or the reason we rise. And so, when the next setback comes, and it will, you must decide, will this be the end of the road, or will this be the forge in which I am remade? That answer, more than the setback itself, will shape the course of your life. One of the most dangerous traps you can fall into is the belief that who you are today is who you will always be. That your intelligence, your skills, your temperament, your potential, they're fixed, carved into stone, unchangeable. Because if you believe that, you won't try. You won't risk. You won't stretch yourself into the uncomfortable places where growth actually happens. And when life demands more of you than you currently have, as it inevitably will, you'll collapse under the weight of your own resignation. But the truth is, you are not finished. You are not a completed product. You are a work in progress, and that progress can continue as long as you're willing to lean into it. This is the essence of a growth mindset, the recognition that ability is not static, that potential is not capped, that who you are today is simply the foundation for who you could become tomorrow. And it changes everything, because when you see yourself as someone capable of growth, setbacks stop being verdicts and start becoming lessons. Think of a child learning to walk. They stumble, they fall, they cry, but they don't stop. Why? Because neither they nor anyone around them assumes that falling means they'll never walk. It's understood that falling is part of the process, but somewhere along the way, as we grow older, we lose that perspective. We start interpreting failure as a statement about our identity rather than as feedback for our development. I failed, therefore I am a failure. That's a fixed mindset. I failed, therefore I'm learning. That's a growth mindset. The difference is subtle in words but monumental in outcome. A growth mindset invites you to embrace difficulty rather than avoid it. If something feels hard, that's not proof you're inadequate, it's evidence that you're stretching beyond your current capacity. Muscles don't grow without resistance, and neither does character, nor skill, nor wisdom. The very presence of struggle is a sign that growth is possible. And if you avoid it, you avoid the very experiences that would have made you stronger. This is why some people plateau early in life while others continue to expand. It's not that the latter never encounter obstacles, it's that they interpret those obstacles differently. They don't say, "This is beyond me." They say, "This is the edge of me, and if I keep pushing, the edge will move." That single shift in perspective separates those who stagnate from those who thrive. Now, adopting a growth mindset doesn't mean you'll succeed every time. You won't. Sometimes you'll fall short. Sometimes you'll be humbled. Sometimes you'll have to admit you were wrong. But all of that is precisely what propels you forward. Every failure properly reframed becomes data. Every mistake honestly examined becomes instruction. Every limitation confronted becomes the soil out of which new capability grows. And here's the remarkable thing. When you begin to live this way, you start to look back on your past differently too. You stop seeing only wasted years and foolish decisions, and you start seeing the raw material of growth. You realize you're not the same person you were then, because you learned, you adapted, you improved. And that recognition gives you confidence that you can keep doing it, again and again, for as long as you live. So the choice is stark. Either you believe you are fixed, in which case your life shrinks and your potential suffocates, or you believe you are capable of growth, in which case the horizon keeps expanding no matter how far you walk. And that choice will determine whether you spend your life defending your limitations or discovering your possibilities. If you want to change the way you see yourself, start here. Stop seeing yourself as finished. Start seeing yourself as becoming. Because once you do, every struggle transforms from a threat into an invitation, and every failure ceases to be an ending and becomes the beginning of something new. It's not enough to simply think differently about yourself. Changing the way you see yourself is powerful, but if it remains confined to the realm of thought, it won't alter the trajectory of your life. At some point, the new self-image you've cultivated has to be expressed through action. Because action is what makes belief real. You can tell yourself that you're capable, resilient, and worthy all day long. But until you begin to live as though it's true, the old habits will keep pulling you back into the person you used to be. Think about how identity and behavior feed one another. If you believe you're weak, you'll act in ways that reinforce weakness, avoiding challenge, collapsing under stress, retreating when things get hard. And those actions will convince you all over again that the belief was accurate, but the reverse is just as true. If you begin to act as though you're strong, even when you don't fully feel it, you provide evidence to yourself that strength is possible, and that evidence starts to rewrite the belief. This is why the most transformative changes in self-image don't come from thinking alone. They come from embodied action. The gap between who you've been and who you want to become is bridged by the choices you make every day. If you've started to see yourself as someone who is disciplined, then you must act with discipline. If you've begun to view yourself as someone worthy of respect, then you must carry yourself with respect. If you've decided to believe you're capable of growth, then you must lean into the challenges that prove it. Without that alignment, the new self-image remains a theory. With alignment, it becomes a reality. This doesn't mean you wait until you feel perfectly confident. You act before you feel ready. Confidence is not the precondition for action, it's the byproduct of it. The soldier doesn't feel brave before the battle. He becomes brave by stepping into it. In the same way, you don't wait for the full conviction that you've changed before you live differently. You live differently first, and in time the conviction grows. Every small decision matters here. People often imagine transformation as one massive leap, but it's really 1,000 tiny steps. The decision to get up when you want to stay in bed. The decision to speak when you want to remain silent. The decision to push forward when retreat feels safer. Each one is a vote for the person you've decided to become. And as the votes accumulate, the identity solidifies. You don't just see yourself differently, you prove it to yourself through action. Of course, this alignment will feel uncomfortable. Your old self, image, will resist it. Habits of thought and behavior don't dissolve overnight. But if you persist, if you keep showing up in ways that match the person you've chosen to be, the discomfort gives way to something new. Integrity. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to believe not just in an abstract sense, but through lived experience, that you are who you say you are. That trust is priceless because it gives you the confidence to keep building, to keep expanding, to keep moving forward. So don't stop at imagining a better version of yourself. Don't stop at believing it's possible. Take the next step and act in alignment with it. Speak the words that person would speak. Make the choices they would make. Live the life they would live. Because when your actions align with your vision, your self-image ceases to be a dream and becomes a reality. And in the end, the world doesn't just see who you think you are, it sees who you've proven yourself to be. All of this leads us to one undeniable truth. The way you see yourself is the foundation upon which everything else is built. If you see yourself through the lens of weakness, failure, and limitation, then no matter what opportunities life places in front of you, you will find a way to shrink them down to fit that image. But if you choose to see yourself as capable of growth, as someone with strengths to celebrate, as someone who can reframe pain and act with courage, then life itself begins to open in ways you never thought possible. We've walked through the power of perception, the need to challenge the beliefs that bind you, the importance of honoring your strengths, the discipline of reframing hardship, the mindset of growth, and the necessity of action that matches the person you're striving to become. Taken together, these are not just ideas. They are a blueprint for transformation. They are proof that you are not condemned to remain who you've always been. The world is heavy enough without carrying the burden of a false self-image. You have a responsibility, both to yourself and to the people who depend on you, to see clearly who you are and who you could become. And clarity demands courage, the courage to look at yourself honestly, to discard the lies that have held you down, and to step into a life that reflects your true potential. So the challenge before you is simple, though not easy. Change the way you see yourself, because when you do, everything else changes. Your relationships change, your opportunities change, your resilience changes, and most importantly, the story you tell about your life changes. Don't leave here content with old patterns, old doubts, and old chains. Leave here with the conviction that you are far more than the narrow image you've been living inside. Because the truth is, you are. And once you see that, once you really see it, nothing will ever be the same again.